Other historic houses in the Aptos village area nearby have not fared so well. This one mysteriously caught fire in the middle of the night, and this also is a very historic building in the Heen subdivision. This is at the corner of Burnell and Aptos Street in Aptos Village.
Interior, the damage is definitely more severe, kind of burning throughout. The plan would reconstruct at the interior, replace, add new interior walls. The exterior would be repair and rehabilitation with some modifications that we'll be reviewing. Additional goals include replacing the 1950 rear addition. Here you can see a close-up photo. It has plywood walls and a flat roof. Replace that with a more compatible addition. Replace the 1960s, 70s garage with a functional garage. And remove the incompatible recent alterations, which include the bay windows and several skylights. So let's review the proposed alterations. At the front of the residence, the plan would replace the projecting bay window, which you can see behind the tree here, with a pair of 1/1 wood frame windows. Replace the existing front door with a similar door, and replace this casement window, which is not, the historic consultant does not believe that was original to the residence, with a new single pane window. At the south elevation, which faces Burnell Street, there's a door here, which is hard to see, kind of a secondary door that would be replaced with a window. Replacing this bay window with a pair of 1/1 windows. And then here you can see the rear addition that would be replaced, and then the roof form would be modified at the rear to have a continuous gable roof, and that also continues that cross gable roof pattern to the rear of the building. It's hard to see from the front of the street, so I don't have photos of this, but there are plate glass windows here and a door. Those would be removed, and a new window would be added. This is a projection that was done, a modification that was done to the building. You can see it's braced with wood supports, and so, and this is a more recent modification, the plan would remove this projection and reconstruct the wall as a flush with the remaining walls, and then reconstruct the rear addition. And so here's a photo again of the rear. This structure would be replaced with a addition with wood siding. As a recommended condition of approval, the siding would be 6 inches rather than 9 inches, which is narrower than the original siding, and this will help identify it as new construction, which is consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards. You can see the roof would be modified to be a rear-facing gable at this elevation. And then the garage would be replaced with a 240 square foot garage in a style compatible with the existing residence, with wood windows, doors, and 6-inch siding as a recommended condition. So the applicant did provide a report prepared by historic consultant Anthony Kirk, and the report finds the proposed alterations are consistent with the Santa Cruz County Code. The plan preserves and restores historic features and character and removes incompatible or recent alterations. And the alterations that are proposed, which include the new rear addition, alterations to the roof at the rear, and a new garage, are compatible with the historic residence, but are also have some differentiation. And there are also additional conditions of approval recommended in your staff report to ensure compliance with the Santa Cruz County Code, including a required survey for any archaeological resources, as this is in a mapped archaeological area. The applicant has provided plans from an engineer which include additional footings and additional wall studs at the interior to improve seismic safety, and this will help to extend the life of the residence for future generations. And the project is categorically exempt from review under CEQA, as the project does comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards. So it is recommended that your commission open the public hearing, approve the proposed CEQA Notice of Exemption, and approve the proposed historic preservation plan as submitted based upon the attached findings and subject to the recommended conditions of approval as in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. Are there first any questions from the commissioners?
I'd like to wait till after I hear the people speak.
Okay, thanks. Then I will open up the public hearing. Do we have any members of the public that would like to speak on this item? And I guess I'll start with the applicant or their representative, if you'd like to speak. I want to twist your arm.
Hi, I'm Pat Sargent, property owner, along with Michael Vaughn and William Wirtz. I just want to thank council and staff for setting this meeting for us, and I really want to thank staff for the help that we got getting through this historic process. It's new to us, and it was quite cumbersome, so thank you very much. Lastly, I just wanted to state that when we bought this property in a bid war with a lot of other folks, it was sold to us as a total loss, but we saw something else. And we're proud to stand up here with this plan to rebuild this property and bring it back to somewhat of an original condition with today's, interior modifications, etc., and the seismic upgrades. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone from the public that wishes to speak?
Thank you, Becky Steinbruner. I live in Aptos, and I remember being really worried when that structure caught on fire. And I was worried that it was going to be bulldozed. So I can't tell you how delighted I am that the owners are going to this very cumbersome and expensive process to keep it intact as one of our valuable historic resources in the Aptos Village community. So thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your commission's recommendation to allow them to do the modifications that they plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bill Ransford, Preservation. We support this project, and we want to thank the new owners for respecting the significance of the historic cultural resources, and we're hoping there'll be more folks like them that can appreciate our significant history and do what they've done here. Is a perfect example that we like to see more in the county. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else wish to address the commission at this time? Okay, I will close the public hearing. Any questions or comments from commissioners?
I just have one question, which is the new roof going on. It's going to be slightly lower than the roofs that show in the front. The roof that's going on the newer section, the flat roof.
Oh, so what do you want to know about
I
it?
just want to know, is this height is slightly lower than the gabled roof in front?
Yes. Yeah, because we're keeping that, it's not the back portion that was part of the original construction, the walls are a lot lower than the front portion. So we can't modify that wall, we'd have to bring up that wall to 11 feet. They put a new 6 and 12 pitch on it and made it all tie in. So we're leaving that wall so the roof line reflects that across the back.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
One more
commissioners.
question? Does anybody know when those bay windows were added?
So we do have photos. Let's see, let me pull out my staff report. Hold on one second.
There's a photo with it, without it.
Right, and I think that was from either 1975 or 80, so it appears they were added sometime after 1980, the bay windows.
So that there's not a question of either the doors or the bay windows becoming historic because they've been there for a long time. I mean, you know, changes over time can become historic on their own. That's not.
Right, yeah, the DPR form for the property identifies recent alterations, which include the bay windows, and then it says, despite these modifications, it has retained integrity. So to me, that indicates that, well, this sort of took a little bit away of the integrity, but it still retains integrity. So I see those as sort of a, if anything, a, you know, detriment to the character of the building.
And it's interesting to me because I came across this house I think the day after the fire.
Right.
And was very concerned. I don't know, I think I called you or sent you pictures or something. And was happy to hear that it could be salvaged. And I'm really happy to see that it's likely. And I used to pass this building every day on the way to school in the 50s and 60s. And it didn't look like this. You know, in fact, it didn't.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? All right, I want to thank you as the owner for taking this on, and rather than bulldozing it, rehabbing it and bringing it back to life, so thank you. And I have one question, Annie, is this used as a single family residence, or is it an office, or was it used? I see it's in a commercial zone.
Yeah, I believe at one time that it may have been used as an office because I think, I believe I think it may have been like a home occupation kind of office where someone lived there and had a business.
CPA, he lived there and he ran his little office
Okay, thank you.
out of the front bedroom.
Okay. I'm sure it was all above board and permanent, of course. I'm just teasing. Okay, great, thanks. So, I guess, would anyone like to make a motion?
I move that we accept this historic preservation plan for 8067 Aptos Street with its compliance with conditions of approval.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Oh, second. I was just trying to remember what we're supposed to do.
Gotcha. Oh, yeah. So it was. Well, should we make one motion that's approve CEQA and the historic preservation plan?
If we can, yes.
Okay. All right.
Make things better.
Yeah. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So the motion passes. Thank you. You can go.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you very much.
Next on new business, we're moving to item B, which is a copy of an ordinance prepared by County Council with minor revisions to Santa Cruz County Code, Chapter 2.38, Historic Resources Commission, to clarify code provisions and update code citations and statutory references. Do we have a presentation or anything?
I can make a few comments.
Sure.
County Council has completed a cleanup of Volume 1 of the Santa Cruz County Code, which includes Chapter 2.58. And this chapter provides regulations for membership, terms of office, and outlines the powers and duties of your commission. The amendments proposed are non-substantive, as was noted. This ordinance was approved in concept by the Board of Supervisors on September 25th and will be considered for final approval by the board on October 2nd. Your commission is not required to take any action on this amendment. It is being provided for your information.
I have a question. Is it County Code Chapter 2.38 or 2.58?
It is 2.58, yes.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so what's Chapter 2.38?
Chapter 2.38 is the chapter which provides regulations for all commissions,
Okay,
general
all
regulations.
right. Just want to make sure, yeah, there wasn't a typo.
Yes, I believe there was a typo in the agenda.
Ah, okay. Any comments, any additional comments on this? It looks like it's just cleanup language to make sure that we're directing the public to the right sections of the county code for reference. I see none. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to address this item? Please come forward.
Sorry, I'm doing double duty here. My videographer did it.
Grants for you. We support Becky's earlier comments. We do want to add, as we know, older buildings have a tendency of burning down. And so we do, regarding safety issues, we would like to make sure that the surrounding weeds and such like that be taken care of so this house does not burn down. So if there's any way to sort of reassure that somebody at the county makes sure that there isn't any possible fires that could happen in the future of this building, we'd much appreciate it. Thank you.
Which building are you referring
The
to?
Redmond House?
Oh, thank you. Sorry. I missed that at the beginning, so I was wondering if you're talking about the house we discussed today. Or... Thank you. Annie, is there a weed abatement ordinance in the county code?
Not that I am aware of, unless it, I can check and report back to your commission. There may be regulations from the fire departments in certain areas, especially in high fire hazard areas.
Thank you. I know City of Watsonville has a weed abatement ordinance, and that's usually enforced by the fire department as well. So, thank you. Okay, so we do not need to actually vote on this.
Correct. And if I can just clarify, Ann is correct that the board approved in concept for all ordinances. There's a second reading required where at that point it's formally adopted.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other comments on this? All right, seeing none, we'll move on. Thank you very much. Okay, going to old business. Item 9A, report from subcommittee regarding submittal requirements for applications for demolition of a historic resource to support required findings for demolition, including the finding of exceptional hardship. And I believe the subcommittee was Commissioner Jenkins and myself. And we both did a bit of research. I know Commissioner Jenkins reached out through the government listserv to ask other jurisdictions whether they have any demolition by neglect ordinances. If so, then to share them with her. And I believe you've got San Luis Obispo.
Yes.
Did you want to talk about that?
Sure. A senior planner, Brian Levaya, in San Luis Obispo, said, we have a section in the City of San Luis Obispo Historic Preservation Ordinance that covers this problem of hardship. I'm aware of no situation where this has been applied. It is difficult to imagine a scenario where it would be based on the required findings. And then he goes on to say, in economic hardship, which is item J in the Historic Preservation Ordinance in San Luis Obispo, if the applicant presents evidence clearly demonstrating to the satisfaction of the CHC, which I guess that's the County Historic Commission, or the City's Historic Commission, or the City Council, that the action will cause an extreme hardship, the CHC may recommend approval and the Council may approve, or conditionally approve a demolition or other application to modify a listed historic resource, even though it does not meet one or more standards set forth therein. The CHC shall consider and make a recommendation to the Council regarding the financial impacts of denial of the demolition permit. The CHC is authorized to request that the applicant furnish information, documentation, and/or expert testimony, the costs of which shall be paid by the applicant, to be considered by the committee and its related findings. In determining whether extreme hardship exists, the committee and council should consider evidence that demonstrates: 1, denial of the application will diminish the value of the subject property so as to leave substantially no economic value, after considering other means of offsetting the costs of retaining the historic resource, including but not limited to tax abatements, financial assistance, building code modifications, changes in allowed uses, and grants. 2, sale or rental of the property is impractical when compared to the cost of holding such property for uses permitted in the zoning district. Or 3, utilization of the property for lawful purposes is prohibited or impractical. So this is their ordinance, their section of the ordinance on this subject in the San Luis Obispo Historic Preservation Ordinance. And I think it's very succinct, but it sort of covers the waterfront.
Thanks. And the example that I pulled was from the city of Santa Monica. They have a requirement for a certificate of economic hardship. And I believe, Annie, did you make copies available?
Yes, there is a copy in the binder that is, I believe Ms. Steinbrenner may have the binder.
Yes, I do.
A copy available.
All right.
There are only two of us in the
reference,
audience.
This is chapter 9.56.160 of the Santa Monica Municipal Code, which is under planning and zoning. What I like about this is it quantifies the pros and cons for proposed demolition of a property. I'll just go through, it requires that the applicant apply for demolition. They have to provide an estimate of the cost of the proposed construction, alteration, demolition, or removal, and an estimate of any additional costs that would be incurred to comply with the recommendations of their Landmarks Commission for changes necessary. They require a report from a licensed engineer or architect with experience in rehabilitation as to the structural soundness of any structures on the property and their suitability for rehab. You require an estimated market value of the property in its current condition, estimated market value after completion of the proposed construction, alteration, demolition, or removal, and an estimated market value after any changes recommended by the Landmarks Commission. So they're looking at market value both with retention and rehab of the structure, as well as tearing down and building something new. In the case of a proposed demolition, an estimate from an architect, developer, real estate consultant, appraiser, or other real estate professional experienced in rehab as to the economic feasibility of rehabilitation or reuse. They ask for the amount paid for the property, the date of purchase, and the party from whom purchased, including a description of the relationship, as well as financing terms. And then if the property is income producing, the annual gross income from the property for the previous 2 years, itemized operating and maintenance expenses for the previous 2 years, and depreciation deduction and annual cash flow before and after debt service, if any, on the same during the same period. Sorry. So this goes into even remaining balance on any mortgage or other financing secured, appraisals obtained within the last 2 years, assessed value of the property, real estate taxes. So this, what it does is it actually quantifies the cost to rehab versus the cost to demo and build something new, and that takes a lot of ambiguity out of the question of is this historically significant enough to save, or is it not that historically significant? It's just facts and figures. Is it feasible to rehab this property or not? One of the findings, actually several of the findings, include the statement that the designated landmark cannot be remodeled or rehabilitated in a manner which would allow a reasonable use of or return from such landmark or property to a property owner. So if their Historic Resources Commission cannot make that finding based on the financial information that was provided, then they cannot approve the demolition or major modification of that structure. So that's all I've got. Does anyone have any comments on our research?
Well, I think the Santa Monica program is pretty clear. I mean, I think it comes pretty close to covering everything you would want covered. Ever, yeah. And the one from San Luis Obispo, yeah. I sort of tripped over a word that always makes me nervous. Impractical, or practical. You know.
What does
Is
that
it
mean?
impractical to save this building? That worries me. So, I really liked the narrowing down the financial impacts to where you can really see whether or not the building is feasible to save and whether I get nervous about discussions of whether or not a building is historic enough.
Right.
And so that was my one red flag. Otherwise,
Right. Well, no, I was saying that they don't get into the question of is it historic enough. It's just
that's what
financial. Yeah.
That's the one that always gets me.
Right.
Is it historic enough?
It's subjective. And
Well, what's interesting in mine is that it says private financial information shall be maintained in confidence by the city. So that's, yours is mostly financial information.
right. Yeah.
Does our historic ordinance include a section on hardship?
Yes, so for applications for demolition or partial demolition of a historic resource, the application submittal shall include a special inspection report from the County Planning Department and a historical documentation report prepared according to guidelines established by the HRC. So that's where you sort of have the authority to require additional information be submitted. And then the report shall contain the following: information which supports the claim, which is essentially findings, it's not worded that way, but that preservation is not feasible due to the deteriorated condition of the structure or object, or would create exceptional hardship, or is necessary to alleviate a dangerous condition. So the application theoretically could include one or more of those criteria and documentation to support the claims made by the applicant. The planning director did suggest that your commission could specify additional information that would be required or could be requested in a application for demolition of a historic resource where they're claiming that there's an exceptional hardship that would be created.
How do you define exceptional hardship?
I think that's what we're trying to do.
That's the $1 million question.
I don't know why I get stuck on that.
Okay, my question then is, would we be able to adopt submittal guidelines that essentially adopt the Santa Monica requirements? At least for the items that they require to be submitted for consideration.
I think what I would like to do is, if that's what your commission is recommending, that I could review it with the planning department and see if there's anything that jumps out as being a concern or a difficulty, and then report back to your commission.
Okay, thanks. Well, I personally would love for the planning department to review these regulations and see if we can include items B 1 through 14 in applications for demolition of historic structures. Do we need a motion on that, or?
I think it would be good to make a motion, yes.
Okay.
And then,
I see hands being raised for getting the public hearing, so. Okay, is there a second to that?
second.
Okay, I will open the public hearing. So anyone who wishes to address the commission on this item, please come up.
Villebrand's 40 preservation at Silvera. We appreciate going out and looking what other counties or cities are doing, so we're not having to reinvent the wheel, especially older communities such as Brandt's 40. But we would suggest Santa Barbara. It was one of the presidios, one of the 4 presidios in California. Of course, Brandt's 40 was the first city and the only city on the coast of California. That's why we keep maintaining of our significance. But we stress something here that sort of struck us a major concern regarding history, regarding this board, unfortunately. Our society went to a meeting pertaining to a Swan House, which is a very significant building. People know about the Swan House, and a very wealthy individual bought the house, threatened the board that they were going to sue you folks for interfering with stopping him from knocking down his property, his house on his property, where there was other significant buildings, not quite as significant as a Swan House, but still sort of, it should have been graced. Instead, somebody with a lot of money came in, threatened the board, is suing the board for getting in the way, and the board had no protection. We felt this is injustice. The county lawyers should have been brought into this to back this board up. Instead, the meeting, and Don Lawrenson from the City Historic Commission also was there, as well as myself, listening to what the board had to say, and they decided we're not getting backed up by the county attorneys or anybody else. We're going to go ahead and give him his way. This is a serious concern, and this board needs to talk to somebody and say, listen, we want the county attorneys to back us up when we make a decision. The other thing we want to mention is we like to be in this issue, we like it to say perhaps significant historic cultural resources as describing this issue, because it is significant, as I just discussed, the serious concern of protecting our cultural resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky Steinbrenner, resident of Aptos. Thank you, Mr. Silvera, for those really good comments, because I see that happen a lot. Threat of legal action seems to really bully people into just making decisions they would not otherwise make. So thank you for that. I want to commend your research into other communities as to how they determine this nebulous, doesn't pencil out or not feasible claim by developers, and thank you for making it a quantifiable and verifiable claim. With this action, I tend to favor the Santa Monica recommendations. They seem more clear-cut. The only issue I had in looking over them is that if preserved, the historic resource would, quote, allow a reasonable rate of return. So there we go with another subjective thing. What is reasonable? And but otherwise, I think it's good and really requires a lot more information than I've ever seen brought before your commission. And I want to harken back to the
an R3 building at 8057 Valencia in Aptos that was the last surviving building of the Heen subdivision. And the developer came in and just simply told you it would create economic hardship with absolutely no documentation to support that. That was available to the public. So the building was termed partial demolition when in fact not one stick of it was left. And the developer got their way with claims and photos of things that did not match up with what was really going on inside the building. If you would have gone and looked in through the windows, you would have seen that. It was, if I may be so bold as to say, false information given to your commission to get what they wanted. So I really support this. Thank you. And I also want to really say that under the county code, making the argument that it's in poor condition and would be a hazard was the argument used for the Aptos Village VFW firehouse for demolition. And after the board allowed that to be demolished, Testorf Construction moved in and held their office in there for 3 years. So there are funny things that happen under those very nebulous agreements. I also want to ask that there be added to your wording that if a demolition permit is granted, that the notice must be given to all local craftsmen. And I'm thinking of Mr. Charles Campbell, who met me that morning that the Valencia Street House was being dismantled, splintered, and he said he tried repeatedly to talk with the owner. May I have 1 more minute, please?
Yes, please finish.
Thank you. To talk with the owner about preserving it, and they would not talk with him at all. Had he have known that it was going to be completely splintered, he would have come in and saved the lumber, the historic lumber, and used it, repurposed it. So we've got to do something about if there are demolitions granted, thank you for granting me another minute, that there is good advance notice being given to the people who could and would make good use of the historic lumber, the historic window fixtures, whatever. And there are people in the community like that. I think they should have a automatic notification of whenever anything is on the chopping block. I also want to encourage that applicants be referred to the County Economic Development Department to help them really work out possible grants for preservation and to make sure that if they do preserve these structures that they can get a reasonable rate of return. And I want to thank you for your good work again. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any more questions, comments on this item? Yeah, you know, I have to say, my desire in bringing this forward in any form harkens back to the Schwann Lagoon House and kind of the mockery that went on back then, at least as I saw it as a private citizen. We had someone who was not a qualified engineer, builder, or architect telling us that the building was structurally unsound. It was just a historic preservation consultant who had no building experience. And that's really what it felt like, at least to the citizens, is that there's really no hard and fast guidance for staff or the commission in really making a determination on the viability of a historic resource. So that said, I would appreciate it if you could take this back to the planning department and see if we could add B1 through 14. And just to, I agree that the nebulousness of a reasonable use or return of the property, it is kind of nebulous. However, there are industry standards for different types of commercial, residential uses of rates of return at points where a residential developer is not going to build because they will not get, whatever it is, 10% or whatever their profit, and same thing for commercial and industrial. So I think if we look to the business industry or the construction industry, we can get a pretty good idea of what that term reasonable would be depending on the type of use. Okay. So moving on, okay, so we switched to 9C first and then 9B?
Did you vote?
Correct.
Okay.
Did you vote on that?
Do we need to vote? Oh, yeah, we did, huh? We took a motion in a second. So, yeah, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Sorry. None. Okay, motion passes. All right, 9C. Discuss cleanup of inventory to identify buildings whose condition may have changed since the last inventory update and to correct information in the inventory. Discuss progress made by the commission towards inventory cleanup.
And I can just make a few words.
Sure.
So last meeting, your commission requested a template to support your commission's work in reviewing properties in inventory. So I included a template in the packet. It provides a column for recommended corrections to the inventory, such as corrections to dates or other factual information, including identifying data sources for the information. I might suggest that your commission focus on clear factual errors rather than recommending additional research, just because the research should be done by a qualified consultant, so that you can still make those recommendations, but that's something that would probably have to happen later rather than now.
Could you say that again?
Oh, yes.
I'm sorry, it's my ears. I'm just.
Oh, so if we have data, and I think you had some of that in your last work that you did, data saying the DPR form says it was constructed in, 1920, but we know it was actually constructed in 1950, and have the data, that kind of information I think we can add to the inventory. But if it's more like we think this property may not be significant, it should have more research by a consultant or something like that, then that would be sort of a different level of research.
I'm not sure I'm following that, because if we're looking at a DPR and the information is inaccurate, and so we're saying this information is not accurate, and we want, and we're recommending an update, that wouldn't be appropriate? Is that?
So certain kind of corrections your commission's actually free to make whatever recommendation you'd like. I'm just trying to clarify that I think some of the corrections can be done at staff level, like if we know this data is wrong, that we can go in and make those corrections. But if it's more work that requires additional research, like we think the rating of significance should be reevaluated, that's something that would probably have to happen at a later date. So your commission can make both recommendations. I'm just trying to clarify the things that can be done sort of at staff level versus things that would require work by a consultant.
So we're really, we're thinking then when we're going through it and making recommendation who our audience is going to be. In other words, if it's staff and not the consultant, because a consultant, you could say, this DPR is garbage. I mean, research is not good. And the consultant would then know how to proceed to get accurate information.
Right, and that's we don't really have funding set aside for doing that level of research, is what I'm saying.
Oh, wow.
So it's just a suggestion that your commission might want to focus on sort of known factual errors rather than making recommendations about sort of general, more comprehensive reviews of.
We should not be vague, and because I'm thinking, I know because I do research,
Right.
when I'm looking at something that this is really not right, and but I could, it's much space to, do you want primary record research saying, look at the
I
San
guess so.
Francisco and blah, 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 and you can find out when this building was built? I mean,
I would guess, can I make a?
Yes,
can I
please
make
do,
a run
please
at
do.
this? Okay, so it looks like if we're going through the listed resources in our districts and we find that, let's say, a resource either has been torn down or it's in poor condition, or we know that it was built in 1940 instead of 1925, we just report that. We aren't supposed to be going out and saying, well, I think this is an NR5 now, but we need to list this on the National Register.
oh,
Yeah,
no, but I don't think,
is that kind of?
Right, yeah, I mean, and your commission is free to do, whatever kind of reviews you want. I'm just, I guess, trying to direct you to do work that we can accomplish rather than sort of that would be done at a future date, which is the kind of, review that Susie's mentioning in terms of like, we think this DPR form should be completely redone, or, that sort of thing, so.
okay, well, I have, suggestions I made, so now I want to compare which ones would be, how would I transfer the information in mine to this form?
And I don't think you really need to transfer it. I think you do good work, and I think it's just a matter, I think this is at the request of the commission, like we have some kind of template for what to look for, so I don't think you need to transfer what she did.
But I'm thinking, the first one, Mangle's house, says, my comment was that it says nothing about cloth sparkles. And Mangles and Sparkles were brother-in-laws, and it plays a huge role in the history of Aptos, Sparkles and Mangles. And so some, in the historical narration, some comment should be made about it. That's just my observation. So is that appropriate, or?
I mean, if she provided primary documentation of that, is that something we could just simply update the forms?
I think so, and I actually probably need to do a little more research about where that line is between, because the Secretary of the Interior Standards says that, update should be, so I can do a little more research in terms of the types of corrections that can be made by staff versus something that should be done by a consultant.
Could I just make a comment about the professionals we hire? It's clear in a lot of Carolyn's stuff that perhaps we would want to hire a different professional. It's a ticklish question, but if they're vague or run over something, maybe we ought to look into other professionals to help with the research.
Well, I think that a problem that I had looking at our inventory is that it's really outdated. I mean, the consultant that was hired in 1980, whatever, 7, had very few resources, and it was kind of a windshield survey, and had very few resources, very few places to look. So a lot of it is based on Margaret Koch. I mean, Margaret Koch, probably don't even know. But, well, she wrote a book about Santa Cruz County history in the 1970s as she worked for the Sentinel. And so she becomes the source for our DPR surveys. And she was notoriously wrong, a lot. So you see that, you look at the DPR and you go, oh, no wonder she's using, these very limited resources. So we now know so much more. And an update needs to be made in terms of just looking at more current references and getting a fuller picture of what's happening.
Yes, I mean, I do agree that it would be great if we could do an update to our entire inventory, and we don't have funding right now to hire a consultant to do that work, so that's why, and I can report back at the next meeting sort of where that line is, but that's why I'm trying to kind of steer commission towards, I think especially the second issue of what is the condition of the resource, are there features that are damaged or missing, that I think that kind of information could be really useful too, but I can commission in terms of you know, the level of sort of corrections that could be done by staff versus things that would require the work of a consultant.
Okay, that's a fair line. I'm thinking, you know, a lot of it too, I noticed like the Vicente Castro house in Aptos. Was this house in Aptos? Really nice, you know, Rafael Castro's son.
Mm-hmm.
And then the county was told that it had to make choices about land to be developed for low-income housing. And now you can't see the Vicente Castro house from the road. In fact, you can't really see it at all. But it's there. I mean, it's been saved, but you can't, it's been changed so much. And that's not reflected in the DPR. The DPR still describes it as being on this big space of property. So what do we do with that? Is it just make a note saying this needs to be changed to reflect alterations to the building or alterations to the property?
Yes, I think that's appropriate too, because that's a pretty big change that we'd want to have.
Okay, so that's something that we would tell staff. I mean, yeah. Just as an example.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Right, I'll open up the public hearing. Anyone that wishes to address the commission on this item, come on up.
All two of us.
Ed Silvero, Brands 40 Preservation. We just would want some clarification. Am I understanding that the department is going to decide what they're going to bring before you, what they consider as historic or not?
They're going to bring to us what they feel they have the bandwidth to change on already listed structures. So if there are any, either the structure's been torn down or it's been modified or there's factual things, errors in the actual DPR forms for those, that we can bring those to staff. And Annie's going to report back to us at the next meeting whether the county has the resources to make, what the county has resources to change.
So the Historic Commission still will be reviewing every project, so you can talk about it for the community.
Yeah. This is only for already listed resources and older historic documentation.
Well, I just want to throw in there, I think it is important. I think what Carolyn mentioned was significant, that it's true. We have books that represent our history. That's a lot of history has become more transparent, and there needs to be something done. Instead of saying we don't have the money for that, you're making decisions because we don't have money, then we should get money, because if we have the information to bring to this board, it should be, in every way, it should be brought to your attention, not some book that was done 40 years ago that they didn't know about the information. There needs to be something where that the new information of the history is current so you can make proper decisions. That's all I just wanted to state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky Steinbrenner, and I support Mr. Silvera's comments about making current the information, and I concur with Commissioner Swift that you can no longer see the Vicente house. It's a very sad thing, and it's intimidating to go in to try to see it because you feel like you're encroaching on private property. So I want to clarify, I remember on your commissions, I think it was January agenda, the county hired an historic consultant to be on call. I remember seeing dossiers of different people that you were going to consider. And now I missed a meeting, but it was my understanding that there is someone on staff to do this very work and that they've been commissioned to do it. So help me with that clarification. I also want to bring to your attention that we need to consider districts or potentially historic districts like the Aptos Village area. It was attempted at one point to create an historic district there, and it didn't work because it didn't have the support of the local property owners, but it can certainly, and in my opinion, should certainly happen again. And so as there is development in that, new development in that area, I think we need to ask that it at least be reviewed by your commission before it goes on. I want to bring to your attention just such a case with Caroline's Thrift. They have an application in right now to add on a little over 200 square feet to the building, but also next to it build a new structure, over 1,700 square foot storage building. In their files in the record department, it doesn't have any drawings, but in my communication with Ms. Murphy, she was kind enough to give me the information. And I'm concerned that this kind of new construction could change the quality of the district and overall feeling of the district. And I don't even want to talk about the Aptos Village project, because that is another can of worms that completely violates the historic quality of the area. But I think that it would behoove the commission to at least request that any new construction in potential historic districts be reviewed by you. And I also want to bring up that the county considers anything 50 years and over to be require historic review. That came up in the cannabis hearings. So this building at 402 Trout Gulch qualifies for that, and I would like to see your commission at least look at what's going to happen there. Thank you.
Thank you. Annie, refresh my memory. Do we have an on-call historic consultant?
Yes, we do. We have ARG on staff. There is a pretty limited budget that is available for them to consult with the county. I don't remember the exact amount. I think it may be $3,000. So generally, what their main function would be, let's say we do get an application in for demolition of a historic resource, and there's a report by an engineer. We can have them, and that's actually in the modified application requirements now, but we can have them do a peer review of that. They have engineers staff as well as architectural staff, so they can do a peer review of that documentation, and that peer review is paid for by the applicant, and then they can, do that second review and make sure that the information provided by the engineer is accurate. And so that's their main role, and we do have a limited budget for things typically like training or, but survey work, as you all know, is very expensive, so that's generally hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think they would be to update our survey. So
another suggestion maybe to look at in the future is to see if any universities hook up with any of their history professors. I know in the 70s, Watsonville's windshield survey was done by a class at Stanford. So it was all done for free, and of course we had to redo it. The century changed, but make sure all the buildings were there. But that's something to consider in the future, is get some students to do it.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks. Any other comments on this item before we move on?
Yeah, I just, in a way, I just want to explain my motive in wanting to do this, because I'm aware that the county has a restricted amount of money that it can spend to update the survey, and I also know that it requires a great deal of research to make a DPR form accurate, and to think that a consultant would ever, I mean, you would have to have $1 million to get that done. So, however, we have on this commission, might not, in my case, always single parent, but a certain set of skills, and our goal, my goal, is to help the county. And so when you say, okay, we're going to have a dividing line, let's divide the line and make comments that the staff can correct, and that's very doable. So that will save me from trying to look at the whole of it, and I'll just concentrate on what staff can plug in. And that's very useful. So I'm thinking the reason that we're having these discussions is so we can narrow down what we can do that would be useful to the county as commissioners. So that's my motivation.
Yes, exactly, and I do appreciate the work you've done today, because I think it is very useful, so. And I will definitely report back at the next meeting to try and give additional clarification about the sort of level of corrections that could be done. And, you know, I'm thinking maybe you're also, the commission may be able to assist in doing some of these corrections as well, so.
I think the more we can narrow it in a way that we can actually get something done.
Yes.
And also, I just wanted to add a comment about the Caroline's building. That is 50 years old, and I remember seeing it every day on the way to school. That was the strangest building. I mean, it looked exactly the same, but what it was the guy was a hoarder, and he was an auto parts salesman. So you would drive by, and there'd be all these hoses and stuff just bulging out the windows. So, you know, I think of it in terms of historic significance. One would not list its use, for sure. And I don't know how old it was, but it was there in 1956, so it is an old building. But that the concrete slab next door sits there because there was a huge fire next to the fire station in the 1960s, I think, 63, something like that. And that slab has sat there since the 60s. And so what was there previous, I can't remember exactly, but it was something like a storage building. So
Maybe you should do some research to see if that concrete slab is significant.
but
Great.
But I understand looking. I mean, and I feel like, you know, if a historic structure is endangered, it can't tell its story
Right.
because of new development. That is significant to look at, and I would like us. I don't know when do we get that opportunity to comment? Is it? I mean, who determines whether or not a historic structure is endangered by new development?
The Chapter 16.42 of the county code basically says that your commission reviews applications for historic preservation plans. So your commission doesn't review projects that are, we don't really have regulations that say if you're next to a historic building, you shall be compatible with that building unless it's an historic district, and we don't actually have any designated districts in the county. So that generally wouldn't come before your commission. There are, the planner certainly reviews projects for compatibility as part of the design review, and then the Aptos Village Plan has some criteria which the project planner reviews. Randall Adams, for example, is the planner for the Caroline's Thrift Building, and they review it for compliance with the design criteria as well as the requirements in the Aptos Village Plan. So there is review done. It's just not done by the commission unless it's an actually designated historic property.
So it looks like the planning department does take in the fact that it's next to a potential historic district. If it was to look at this parcel.
Well, I don't know about the term potential historic district. Like, I don't think that's a real thing.
Well, it was.
Yeah, right. It was
Yeah.
considered, but I think since it was never designated that there's no
So
sort of
it's not-
official
no,
designation
yeah,
of the district. Yeah, so.
But they would still look at it and say, okay, it's in the historic, there's the Bayview, there's there's Aptos Street and Valencia and.
Yeah, our design review chapter does talk about compatibility, so that should be considered within the whole context of,
Great.
yeah.
So on Caroline's Thrift, which is, it just sounds like I'm messing up your name. Caroline's Thrift, was that found not to be a potential resource?
Yeah, so it was looked at when the Aptos Village area was being considered as a district, and the consultant that was Dill Design Group found that they recommended it as a non-contributing building because it was outside the period of significance. So yeah, it was recommended as an R6, meaning not
I
significant.
think it was built in before,
Okay.
on the site of the old blacksmith shops.
Site of the old
Moving on to item 9B, discuss potential approaches to address demolition by neglect, including evaluating incentive-based approaches. Is that something you were presenting on, or?
I just have a few comments about that as well. I did speak with the planning director and discussed the idea of a new ordinance that would have property maintenance requirements for historic buildings to prevent demolition by neglect. And the planning director feels that probably now is not a good time to bring this type of ordinance forward. Our sustainability section continues to be focused on completing the sustainability update. I think we talked about that at previous meetings. We don't feel that the board would want to direct staff in a direction that takes away from that work. And I also want to be, we want to be respectful of your time as a commission and make sure you're using your time effectively, given that context. And your commission may want to consider continuing to work on the inventory, and then we could bring a discussion back of demo by neglect in a year or so, when there may have been more opportunity to review the condition of structures in the county and understand to what extent demolition by neglect might be an issue. The planning director is supportive of a more incentive-based approach for maintaining historic buildings, and such an ordinance could allow for additional uses beyond those allowed in the zone district when the property owner would agree to maintain or restore their building, and when this additional use would provide for an economically viable use that might not otherwise be available. An example would be a commercial building on a commercial property that could be potentially converted to a residential use if this would provide for a viable use for the property. And the planning director believes that the board would support this type of approach, and this could be considered with the sustainability update. So those are my comments.
Would that extend to a historic residence located on an agriculturally zoned property?
Yes, I mean, I think that it was thought of in the context of the Redmond House. I think we would have to, it would be discretionary, so we'd have to consider each use and whether it was compatible with the underlying zone district. So I think it could allow some flexibility, such as maybe bed and breakfast, but something like, let's convert the building to a shopping center or something, you know, at that point we'd have to look at compatibility with the underlying zone district.
Okay, thank you. I think this is a good step. I think the Mills Act would be another great way to incentivize historic preservation. Any other commissioner comments?
No.
Okay,
I'm just going to thinking about, maybe we can come back to it in a year, it kind of bothers me.
Me too.
I have a feeling something
Yeah.
might not be there in a year.
You know, that whenever I hear that the building is deteriorated to a point where it cannot be rehabilitated or cannot be saved, that's another, potentially that could happen within a year. I mean, you know, so I would love it if we could bring it back a little sooner than a year.
I agree with that.
I know the county has projects that are taking the sustainability work.
Yeah, maybe I can support, help out with that a little bit. Right now, our division is working very hard to wrap up several items that have been kind of pulled out of the sustainability update as high priorities for the Board of Supervisors. And we're working diligently to kind of get through those so that we can focus on the updates to the general plan and the county code that will really get to the meat and the heart of the sustainability update. We're working on drafting an RFP for an EIR consultant to work the EIR next year. In context with that, we'll also be getting back to actually writing the updates that need to be written. So even though a lot of work has taken place and it has been a few years, there's still a significant amount of work for our little group to accomplish. Next year as we do the EIR, and then in the year after as we do kind of the public process and adopting the FEIR and bringing the update to the board. So I think what we can do is kind of revisit status of staff's availability to help with that, and give you an update on what the planning director might be thinking at that time. And we can do that in 6 months, that's fine. I think we just have to make sure we stay somewhat focused on getting that update done, or it'll be another 4, 5, 6 years and we still wouldn't have gotten there. But that doesn't mean that there aren't, I think there was another recommendation for the preserving or doing incentives to preserve uses and expand uses. Something like that can come forward a little bit faster. So at least we can make kind of some progress on it. But if we don't focus all of our resources on that update, it's just not gonna get done. So there's some recognition of kind of the limitations of staff as well.
I'll open this up to public hearing. Anyone wish to speak on this item?
Ed Silvera, Grants for Preservation. I think what this discussion is extremely significant because it's an example of, well, we don't have enough staff, we don't have enough money. In the meantime, the paint job looks worse, and it's even more reason to knock it down. We were instrumental, our society, Villabrands of 40, along with the Cabrillo Club, which I was the vice president during the time of this process. We raced to shore up that barn at UCSC. Now they do nothing but brag about it, and now they make $2,000 8 hours of usage, and so they're making tons of money. And that barn doesn't compare what could be done if that Redmond house gets restored. I mean, how it's going to affect the youth, the community. It's something you see coming or going through our county, where the hay barn you do not see, but yet the hay barn is one of the last hay barns on the coast. We were aware of that, we had support. And so what we're stating is, here's an example where there needs to be adamantly something where we come up with the funds to put it in action, to give this some real attention, because I know that the Watsonville community will absolutely benefit, as well as our own county, by putting energy and letting the community. I mean, we're talking about community and nonprofits got that barn established. It wasn't the university didn't put a dime into it. And if we could do it with the barn, and that barn cost $4 million to put together, maybe 5. But the point is, since we shored it up to allow an opportunity for that to happen, and we absolutely believe the same thing can happen with the Redmond house. Why not? A lot of people love that house. They see it when they go by. We're talking about an example of what we've done, and we got a lot of flack from the staff at the university. They wanted it to knock down so they could put more buildings from whatever. And so what we're saying is we're talking about something that we succeeded in doing because we had the foresight to protect our historic cultural resources for community meetings, for dances, for things. And we're talking about a barn. Can you imagine the Redmond House, you know, getting it in gear? I mean, and everybody to see. So what I'm stating here is that there needs to be some action here where some funding is from somewhere in this county to boost this situation so we don't have a La Bahia situation where the boardwalk couldn't come up with money to paint the building, you know, and let it deteriorate visually. So we don't need these kind of examples that know what could happen. So I'm adamantly requesting that this being taken into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to just, yeah, go? Okay, yeah, okay.
Do you want to take a break?
Do you want to take just a 5-minute break?
Sure, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. So we will reconvene at 11:20. I believe you were
Thank you.
just about to speak.
Is Commissioner Jenkins not coming back?
She has an engagement in Watsonville she has to
Okay.
get to.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Becky Steinbruner, resident of Aptos. Thank you for this report. It also really worries me to hear that the planning director doesn't really want to address this issue. And that's what I see it, and it concerns me that it's being put off another year because your commission has been discussing this for a long time. And Commissioner Merriam has presented some very good research and information about the Mills Act and other jurisdictions that have a demolition by neglect ordinance. I think we need to act on it now. And the reason I think we need to act on it now is because I have great concern, as many in the community do, that with the Tutt family developing a very exclusive hotel across the road from the Redmond Hirahara house that does not allow blight, that something could happen to that house. And the longer it sits without any weatherization, winter's coming on, the case could be made that it is not feasible to preserve it, even though it is on the National Registry of Historic Places. The barn certainly needs to be at least documented and the materials saved so that if it cannot be rebuilt, and I request that it is rebuilt because of the rich history that it holds for the Japanese American society and for a message carrying through to our society in the future, that it should be preserved, rebuilt. So I want to ask that your commission make the recommendation that the board consider adopting the Mills Act. I want to ask that your commission make the recommendations that the board adopt a demolition by neglect ordinance and that it be acted upon in the next 2 months before winter comes. Because there are it's not only the Redmond Hirahara, I'm sure there are many other structures out there that you're all aware of too, that are just simply being allowed to fall down and then it will not be feasible to bring them back. I want to commend the commissioners, especially Commissioner Merriam, for doing the hard research and work that she has done to bring information forth about the Mills Act. And I want to just propose that be put on the board's agenda within the next 2 months for consideration, and that we offer incentives such as free new use permits so that the Redmond Hirahara house could be used for weddings and special events, so that the blight issue is addressed. Congressman Panetta is watching this, and he's very interested, as are many, many people in the Pajaro Valley. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so on old business, do we need to make a motion on item 9B? Or is there any action?
We had discussed reporting back in 6 months on staff availability for issue, we can certainly make a motion to that, and I can kind of report back in, so that would be April.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion. Thank you. Great. Moving on to item 10, commissioner presentations and informational items. Do any commissioners have any information or presentations that you'd like to present?
Maybe this isn't appropriate right now since I don't think very much of these microphones. When Becky was mentioning things that could be done with large buildings, and she mentioned weddings. And I thought, you know, I've been watching some of these places that are wanting to put on weddings, and they can have 50 people. Now in Davenport, 50 people is just your immediate family. And when we're doing this kind of stuff with those big buildings that are up there and falling apart, we should be able to put in 200 people for weddings or larger. So I would just like to make that as a comment. Too many small weddings, we need big weddings. 200 is not too many for Davenport.
So Alberta, which buildings are you referencing that have the wedding?
Well, I'm looking at one of the cheese barns that are on Coast Road. And that's the one that I'm looking at the most. There's another one up there, but it fell apart.
Okay.
And like it just came crashing down, and it's I think the county is surrounded, or the owner is surrounded with a big fence. But the cheese barn is just about ready to collapse on itself. But it could be helped, and it could be turned into a nice community area.
Thank you. Commissioner Swift, do you have anything you'd like to say?
I think not. but I am thinking about the one thing to, while one of my concerns when we're dealing with rehabilitation of structures is that the building has a new use or has a use that can support its rehabilitation. In other words, it's like, let's rehabilitate this, and then it sits there forever.
Right.
Deteriorates all over again. So that's one thing. I don't know how to look at that. But it's something that, needs to be considered when we look at saving historic structures like the Redmond House. Just thought I'd make that point.
Thanks. Yeah. All right. Just taking note of some of the comments that were made today, I'd like for staff to look into the possibility of recording future meetings. I believe that the county has a public access channel, and this room is equipped for recordation. So if it's possible to get staff to record these meetings so that they are available to the public and on the website, that would be great. Just to give further transparency into what we're discussing, and so people have better access to what's going on in the historic community here. That would be great. The Redmond House, I just have to say that I understand the lack of staff time and the limited resources that the county has. Every jurisdiction is feeling that stress right now, but it is disheartening that the county has chosen to take no action in the Redmond House situation in the last several years. We have brought before this commission several potential solutions that might help the Redmond House. It is one of the gateways to the city of Watsonville, and it is sat vacant and deteriorating for 30 plus years. And the city of Watsonville does not have any jurisdiction over it, nor can we do anything. Simply changing the nuisance ordinance to include neglected properties or unsafe properties would at least give us the county some leg to stand on in going after and requiring some kind of stabilization or review of the Redmond House and other similar properties that are, just essentially may fall over at any time. The Redmond House has holes in the roofs. It has no foundation. Brought up the demo by neglect ordinance, brought up the Mills Act, and I think this is something that I personally am going to keep pushing on until something happens. So especially something that's happening with the Redmond House. I have reached out to the property owners and have not heard back from them. I have unofficially heard that they still have no plans for that property, but they are undertaking a significant development within the city right behind that, including 2 hotels and a lot of retail and commercial space. So I know that in the next year or so, they will be planning to do something on that property. And my guess is that it's not to restore the building. And so engaging them, whether that's our planning department or economic development department in the county, earlier rather than going through another winter would be really advantageous, because it is sad that that is a historic resource. It is on the National Register, and the county has been unable to / unwilling to do anything. So
Thank you.
That's just about all I have to say. But I also, on the other hand, want to thank you for bringing back the small steps to improving our ordinance and cleaning it up and making a God, my words are leaving me, but coming back to us in April with some language in demolition by neglect. I want to thank you and thank staff for that. So that's about it for me. I guess we'll move on to written communications. Do we have anything?
Yes.
I believe I did see an email regarding, was it Caroline's Thrift? There was a...
Yeah.
But I don't see it in here.
I tried to copy it, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure going to do it.
But on that, it looks like...
Should be at the very end of your packet.
No. Let's see.
Not mine.
Oh, you know what, I believe that I sent it in email.
Yeah, I remember seeing the email, yes.
It was late.
Yeah, I'm
Was
not
it, I didn't print it. So was that regarding Caroline's
Yes.
Thrift?
Yeah,
Okay,
I have
so
a-
we
I have a
have,
copy if you-
oh, thank you. Thanks. So there was email correspondence from Ms. Steinbrunner regarding 402 Aptos Street and whether that had been evaluated or was under consideration as being part of a contributor to a potential historic district. The response from staff is that Caroline's Thrift at 402 Aptos Street is not considered a historic resource and therefore did not require additional review to process the application for the addition or modification. Let's see. Okay, and with that, I guess I will, do I have to open up the written communications?
If anyone has any comments, they're welcome to.
Yeah.
I do. Thank you, Becky Steinbruner. It was my communication in your packet, and I'm glad you're able to see it this morning. I think the Commission raised a very good point this morning. How does it get decided whether an application requires your review? And I think that it's important to really look at that issue, with Mr. Adams being the planner for much of the development in the Aptos Village area, that we find out from him how he decides. We have a potential historic district, and as I said earlier, there was an attempt made, I don't know how long ago, Commissioner Swift, you would know, 20 years ago or so, to make this an historic district. And it's certainly I think there are 18 different structures that are in the registry in the area. It certainly qualifies to be an historic district. And there is interest from some people that we make that effort again. So how do planners view the big picture when they're looking at a project like this one? And it seems like it would be best to err on the side of reasonableness, to just allow your commission to review the plans and submit comment, not requiring any further studies or expenses to the applicant, but simply so that your commission is aware of what's going on in the different areas for which you oversee the preservation of historic and cultural resources. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a Phil Brands of 40 Preservation. We also believe it's important that another department review what's historic and what isn't. I think there should be a request from your department stating that even if it could or could not, that this board should be CC'd at least about this possibility of you thinking that it might be important enough to review, instead of relying on somebody from a planning department that feels like, oh, I don't think so. That doesn't seem right to us. I mean, there needs to be a little more cooperation here. Then, no, they don't need to hear about this. I think it's ridiculous. And I also want to state too of the importance of the Mills Act be adopted as soon as possible. There's been years of study on it. I mean, we have documentation about the mill so far back that it's had to make some improvements over this time. And I know Susie has mentioned that she's worked on it for I don't know how many years, 4 years. I think that's long enough. I think it's time to put it in gear. So thank you for your consideration.
I have a question now. I am curious about what the plan is for Caroline's. And I realize that's not something that's going to come before our commission, but as an individual, how would I find out? I mean, how do people find out what a development proposal is going to look like?
You can contact the project planner, who's Randall Adams, and you can view the plans, and any member of the public can make a comment on the plans. Let's see. I don't have his contact information with me, I can get it to you, or you can just call the main line and ask to speak with Randall, and they will transfer you.
Is there a way to look online and see what the proposal would be?
I don't believe that they're available online, the plans. There is a description of the project, but you probably want to see what it's actually looking like. So, yeah, so you can also come to probably best to call the planner, and then he can make the plans available for you rather than coming in if they're not available, but that would be what I'd recommend.
Okay.
Comment period closes very soon.
So you almost have to know
Yeah.
about a plan before you can ask about it. I mean, I remember the old days when newspapers worked, you know, and it would be in the paper, such and such as plan for, you know, and the plans would be in the paper. Oh well.
Is your department requiring digital copies of plans when they're submitted, or do you think these are only hard copies?
You know, I don't know for certain. We are starting to transition to electronic plans, but I don't know what was submitted for this application.
Thank you. Great. Well, with that, I want to thank everybody for coming today, and I will adjourn our meeting at 11:40. All right, until next time. Thank you. So our next meeting is January 14th, 2019.